Rabbi Meir spot?
No, I got no spot.
Okay. Today's daf is daf Gimel, and uncharacteristically, we're actually holding on the top of Gimel.
I'm gonna give him a check.
Okay. Let me move over. We got a little set up shop all the way over there. Set up shop.
Centralize yourself.
We have no sponsors. Okay, 23.
20. Gimel.
23A. Is Gemara? Is that Gemara?
Oh, yeah. Please.
Thank you.
Okay, we're holding on Chaf Gimel. We mentioned in the Mishnah when we were learning a couple of days ago, the Mishnah had told us, it was listing off how many aliyahs you get on a specific type of day. We said normally on a regular day you get 3 aliyahs. Then we said on Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed it's 4. On Yontiv you get 5. Yom Kippur you get 6. And Shabbos you get 7. And the din of the Mishnah was that on any of those days it seems the halacha is you cannot do less than that. However, it did say in the Mishnah that you could do Haisafis. It wasn't clear in the Mishnah if it was going on the whole statement or only on the last one of Shabbos. Meaning there's a question in the Paiskim, do we say that you can make Haisafis on Yom Kippur and on Yontiv? And what would be the reason why maybe you couldn't? Is because like we said yesterday, the idea is that each one of these days receives an extra aliyah for some stringency in the malacha that occurs on that day. So that maybe, let's say, but Rosh Chodesh, there's a slight Isser Malacha we discussed about. And then Yontiv has a regular Isser Malacha that comes with the Chiyuv Malchus. Then beyond that, you have the Isser Malacha on Yom Kippur, which comes with the Chiyuv Pares. And then you have the Isser Malacha on Shabbos, which is an Isser Skila, so that the Ma'alin B'Kodesh, so to speak, mandates an additional aliyah. So maybe the halach is you can't be Mosif by Yontif or Yom Kippur because then you're effectively undermining the entire reason why we set the number at 5 or 6, whereas Shabbos, once it's the most, then you could add as many as you want because you're not really detracting from anything. That's the argument to be made where we will say that the Ran says this actually on the Mishnah, that you shouldn't be Mosif any aliyahs into anything other than Shabbos. Rashi, the Rambam, and the Pashas most Rishonim hold you can be Mosif into Yom Kippur and to Yontif. And so that's a machlekes, and it seems to be that that's the halach. That's how we pass. Certainly in the Chassidish Olam, they most of us many times. And then again, growing up in Woodmere, if there was a reason to, we would add in 4 or 5 aliyahs, depending upon how many bar mitzvahs there were. Either way, so the Mishnah seems to be saying a davar pashit that it goes 4, 5, 6, 7, and Shabbos gets 7. Zok the Gemara 3 lines from the top. Sorry, top line of the Gemara. B'yontiv chamish b'yom kippur shisha v'chulu. Masnisin money. Who is the Tan of our Mishnah? So we're going to introduce 2 Tanoim, maybe 3. Loi Rabbi Yishmael v'loi Rabbi Akiva. The Tanya, the Brisa says b'yontiv chamish b'yom kippur shisha Shabbos shiva. So he goes, which sounds to be like our Mishnah. However, it says ein poichsin mehen ve'ein moisifin aliyah div Rabbi Yishmael. So even though the numbers are good, the concept of being moisif and aliyah is a problem. Rabbi Yishmael seems to say you can't be moisif not even on Shabbos. Rabbi Akiva oimer b'yontiv chamisha good. Yom Kippurim Shiva, that's already a problem. B'Shabbos Shisha. So he flips Yom Kippur and Shabbos, makes Shabbos 6, Yom Kippur 7, and he says Ein Posel Men Avon Mosifin Alez. He has the Asafas right, but he doesn't have the number right. Whereas Bishmael has the numbers right, but doesn't have the Asafas right. So money, Rabbi Bishmael Kasha Teisefes, Rabbi Akiva Kasha Shisha v'Shiva. So which one is it? So Amarava Tana de Rabbi Bishmael. Really, what we're saying is that even though we taught the halacha earlier in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, the sheet of our Mishnah is the base Rabbi Shmuel, meaning Rabbi Shmuel obviously had many Talmidim, so the yeshiva that he was in, they were saying it over in his name, in our Mishnah, and this Rabbi Shmuel is going to be a different Tana in the name of Rabbi Shmuel. The Tana of Rabbi Shmuel, b'yom tov chamisha b'yom kippur shisha b'Shabbos shiva, ein person menavol mesiv and alei Rabbi Shmuel, kash Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Shmuel, trade tonight deli b'Rabbi Shmuel. Very good. So what is the Gemara saying? We effectively have 3 sheetas, but for all intents and purposes, for our understanding, we have 2 sheetas. You have the sheet of Rabbi Shmuel, and you have the sheet of Rabbi Akiva. Either you say you go 6 for Yom Kippur and 7 for Shabbos, like our Mishnah, or you go like Rabbi Akiva, who says that no, you go 6 for Shabbos and 7 for Yom Kippur. Now we had said in the Gemara earlier that the reason why you go 6 for Yom Kippur and then 7 for Shabbos is because, like I said before, about the malacha getting more stringent. What would be the understanding of the mitzvah of, or the takana of 5, 6, 7 for Rabbi Akiva? Meaning, Obviously, he's not arguing that there's no skila by Shabbos and that there's only a kares by Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur is called a Shabbos Shabboson, whatever this means.
Ein lechanami, but
Yeah.
the question is if he's working within the progression, that the same progression the Gemara mentioned earlier. So there's a Turei Evan over here who says an interesting idea, that he says that it has what to do with the fact that on Ne'ilah we have a Hisafa in the Tefillah of Ne'ilah. That since there's an extra Tefillah of Ne'ilah on Yom Kippur, that somehow that makes Yom Kippur be something that we should be metakin 7 and Shabbos should get 6, which is still difficult because, again, at the end of the day, the Gemara mentioned earlier the progression of the malachas. However, it could be that Rabbi Kiva has a shita, I forget who quoted this, but that he might understand that kares rises to the same sort of level of a chomer of skila, meaning that even though certainly if I would ask you which one, if you'd ask a random child, which one would you rather have, some mystical idea that in one day you might lose something, whereas today I can stone you to death, most people would maybe choose not to be stoned to death. So in that sense, there's a chomer to it. But who says that it's necessarily more chomer in the grander sense of what's considered a worse punishment? That's not very obvious. But even so, the Turei Evan is saying that it's a Ne'ilah halacha, and it would make sense then that we basically would be having almost two separate ideas behind what the takana of 4, 5, 6, and 7 were. Because we did say earlier we had a question about Tainis Tzibur. And by Tainis Tzibur, the question was, do we say it doesn't have a musaf, therefore it doesn't have 4, and therefore it's just 3? Although we did say that maybe you could say that since it gets tefillas anenu, that's already considered like a hisaf in the tefillah. So you see clearly in the Gemara that there was a tzad to say, at least in by Tainis Tzibur, that adding a tefillah in somehow matters. That there's maybe a difference between whether we're coming at this from almost like a sur meirah perspective, mitzad de malacha, or from the asay tov perspective, where we're adding on tefillas. But regardless, you have two different shittas in the Tanoim here. You have Rabbi Shmuel and you have Rabbi Akiva about which one gets 6 and 7. We pass like Rabbi Shmuel, which is the way we do it. And in terms of Haisafis, so there already the Pashta says we pass that you can be Maisif, and okay, cool. Right, Man Tana Lahadatanya. So of the two Tanoim that we just saw, who is the Tan of the following brayso? B'yomtiv Ma'achrin Lava Ma'arin Lotzeis. Let's read this slowly. On Yontiv, Ma'achrin Lava, you come to shul late. I mean, it seems like it's saying you should come to shul late. Now, why would you be coming to shul late on Yontiv? Meaning, it doesn't mean come to shul late. It means start davening later. The shul should daven a later minyan. U'memaharin lotzeis, and you should leave quickly. Meaning, try not to, dilly-dally after shul. Why is that? Because since on Yontiv, you're allowed to do Melechas Eichel Nefesh, so in the morning, therefore, you'll need to make preparations for the Suda that's going to be afterwards. You should start davening a little later to give time in the morning. Same thing goes in the end. You shouldn't dilly-dally at the end of davening because you got to get home to be Mekayim your mitzvah of Simchas Yontiv. That's Yontiv. Yom Kippur, where there's no Suda afterwards, and there's no Heter Malacha, even if there would be before. So Mimaharin Lava, you start early, Uma'achrin Latzeis, and you stay late. Ubishabbos Mimaharin Lava, in the morning you can't prepare for the meal afterwards because the Malachas Asar on Shabbos, even Eichel Nefesh. However, Mimaharin Latzeis, but to be Mekayim them in the dinim of Einik Shabbos, to sit down and have your Suda, you shouldn't sit and schmooze too long by the Kiddush. So the Gemara wants to say that from here, maybe you could bring a raya to the Shita Rabbi Akiva. Why? Because what are we saying? We're saying that in Yom Kippur, right? What is a person supposed to do? A person's supposed to stick around. Meaning it looks like that extra bracha is really going to make the difference between showing up late and getting yelled at by your wife, or showing up on time and being okay. Lema Rabbi Akiva de is like Gavri Yisera. Someone says no. I feel Tamer Rabbi Shmuel. You could say that this brisa is Rabbi Shmuel, who holds that Shabbos is 7 and Yom Kippur is 6. And what does it mean over here that you're mimachrin on the end of the davening by Yom Kippur is the nafish sedura de yuma. As everyone knows, we're talking about a very long musaf, the Avodas Yom Kippurim, and the Hashtach Havayas and all the stuff. So therefore, you're still anyways going to be coming home late. So there's a bunch of stuff over here, but there's a I think it's Rabbi Yaakov Emden who brings a raya from this Gemara. At least has been a gay Yontiv that a person is supposed to come to shul a little late. Davening should be late on Yontiv. Why? Because the person has to stay home and help with the preparations. He asks, "What do you mean help with the preparations of food?" That's what the wife is doing now. What do you mean? What do you mean? So he says, no, it doesn't mean that you're going to prepare with the food. Your wife's going to be preparing the food, and you got to watch the kids. So they bring a raya from here. This is they say this is a take-home Gemara. This is a Gemara you can take home to your wife. Yeah, you should bring, or don't take home to your wife, whatever.
You don't think it's the shul yet, huh?
Oh, so it could be your Mekayim that did by taking your kids to shul, meaning even at a younger age. This is shaloik, certain Rabbanim in the neighborhood who say you shouldn't bring them until they're 43. But I'm saying, if you want to take the kids out of your wife's hair, then in a chanami.
You should have shul later. You should have it earlier.
They should have shul
Later. It should end later, I'm saying.
I mean, it should end later to keep the kids home. Yeah, in a chanami.
We always say Chatzi Lashem, Chatzi Lachem on Yom Tov. I know that's not the way Rashi's explaining it, but you could say, well, you get more of your own time on Yom Tov versus Shabbos. You can relax more.
Could be.
etc.
Yeah, no, I hear that. It's an interesting idea. But either way, so what are we saying over here? We're saying that there's no raya one way or the other, and so therefore we go weiter. Okay, so Hani Shlosha Bechamisha Beshiva Keneged Mi. So we said earlier that we lane 3 Keneged Tar Nevi'im Ksuvim. We said it's yeah. So we said that was the explanation for 3. But here the Gemara is really sort of asking, that might explain why you have 3 aliyahs, but what about the 5? What about the 7? Meaning we know that there's with each yontiv or with each day there's a difference, but does that difference necessarily mean that it should get an additional on top of the previous one? Maybe each one of these days has something special, and they all get 4. Who says it should be 5, 6, and 7? So the Gemara is going to go through a couple of different possibilities as to how that's going to work. Okay, so Moshe says like this: Pligi bar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani v'chad de'imei. And who was that? Umanu Reb Shimon ben Pazi. Or v'amri lo Reb Shimon ben Pazi v'chad de'imei. And who was that? Umanu Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani. V'amri lo Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani. Okay, so the Baisa, whatever it is, you have Amoraim here arguing over it. What exactly is the sort of makor or what they relied upon to say that there should be 3, 5, and 7? And you'll notice they didn't mention 4 for Rosh Chodesh, and they didn't mention 6 for Yom Kippur. We'll get to that in a minute. Chad amar keneged birchas koyanim. V'chad amar keneged shloisha shemer hasaf, which we'll get to in a second. So birchas koyanim, meaning there's 3 psukim by birchas koyanim. The first pasuk is Yivrecha Hashem v'yishmerecha is 3. The second pasuk is 5, and the third pasuk is 7 words long. Now you understand why, once you see the answer, why they didn't ask about Yom Kippur, which has 6, because clearly that's not going to help by birchas koyanim. Right? So, and notice they don't want to pick sides in the machlekes, meaning there's 3, 5, and 7. Maybe it's talking about Shabbos, maybe it's talking about Yom Kippur, who knows? But the point is, that's the first sheet. Meaning basically there's 2 or 3 times throughout Tanakh where you see a reference to the idea that the king is surrounded by either 3, or maybe he's surrounded by 5, or by 7 different sort of servants or people that are the shomrim of the Melech. Rashi over here says that by the 7 it's referring to Achashverosh. That's where you see you have 7. You look in the Megilla. Taisa says it can't be. You can't tell me we're running to an Achashverosh, to use that as the makar for why we have this many aliyahs when we're reading the Torah. So he says it must be referring to a pasuk in Yirmiyah that has a different reference. Although I think we say that when we talk about the 100 kolos by Shofar, that comes from Aim Sisra and the Bechiyah. So obviously there's no problem with necessarily just using it as a Gilui Milsa Ba'alma to what is considered the way a king is treated, for us to then consider laning, basically like when we're being Kareh B'Torah, it's effectively we're being Mamlech HaKadosh Baruch by speaking on his Torah in Shul. Okay. Okay, right. Tani Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef says a brisa that's going to be a support for what we just said. Gimel Chamisha v'Shiva Shloisha Shemer Asaf Chamisha Mirei Pnei HaMelech Shiva Rei Pnei HaMelech. Amalei Abaye Ada Idna My Time Alei Parish Lan Mar. This is such a beautiful idea. Rav Yosef, meaning normally Rav Yosef and Abaye, if Rav Yosef says anything, if he has a peep, he whispers. Abaye is right around the corner and he says, "We're going to have something to argue with." Here he can't really argue on him, but he had to open his mouth. He had to say something. So what did he say? He says, "You had something and you couldn't tell us all about this." I didn't know to say that you'd need to hear it from me. He says, and he responded to him, did you ever ask me that I said and I held back the Torah from you? Meaning, a person is not supposed to do that. Really, a person who has Torah to give, especially a Rav, a rabbi, if he has Torah to give over and he chooses to hold it back, they say that on some level that's very similar to a Navi that is given a nevuah and he's not mefarsim it. A person has Torah in him, it's his responsibility to be mefarsim as much as possible. Okay, so that's the makar for 3, 5, and 7. Amalei Yaakov Minah of Yehuda. Minah here, this word Minah, the Rishon don't understand why he was referred to as Rabbi Yaakov the Min. Min is normally not a very nice way to refer to someone, so they say it means different things. Taisa changes the gears here. It does not mean what it means when you think you hear the word Min. So he says, maybe that was his name, maybe that's where he was from. So what did he ask him? Hani Shisha the Yom Kippur Keneged Mi. So clearly the Gemara is understanding, like our Mishnah, that Yom Kippur is the one that gets 6.
It's possible to say he was making fun. In other words, it's possible to say, "Oh, you said 3, 5, 7, and you meant whatever. Well, Yom Kippur doesn't fit." In other words, it may have been that his
could be.
intent,
I think that's a stretch, but
he was a man.
I hear that. I think it would be difficult to say that
because what's wrong with what he said?
yeah, there's nothing wrong with what he said, and I think it would be difficult unless he's like unless it's sort of like
why they
like
let
he
him in?
started off that way and
Yeah.
maybe he went the right way, and now we're just referring to him as
It doesn't say Rabbi Yaakov.
I know. So I did notice that it doesn't call him as Reb Yaakov.
Yeah.
So- but either way, so he asked the Shishi of the Yom Kippur Keneged me. Amarlei Keneged Shisha Shalom Demi Yamina Shel Ezra v'Shisha Mismaila. We know that when Ezra lay in the Torah for all of Klal Yisrael, he had 6 on one side people, 6 on the other side. Remember the pasuk says V'Yamad Ezra Sefer Al Migdal Eitz. He stood on a wooden migdal, a wooden platform. There we go. Asher Asu Ledover, which was made for Kriyas Torah. Let's say. V'Yamad Etzlei. Now who stood on the side of him? Matisyo, V'Shema, V'Anya, V'Urya, V'Chilkiya, V'Maseh. That's 6. Al Yaminoi. U'Mismailai, Pidaya, U'Mishael, U'Malkias, V'Chashum, V'Chashpadona, Zechariah, Meshulam, which sounds like 7. Ask the Gemara, Hani Shiva have it. So the Gemara says, no, Hainu Zechariah, Hainu Meshulam. Why did they call Zechariah Meshulam, Meshulam Zechariah? He says, V'Amai Kar Meshulam. The Mishlam Be'uvde, that Zechariah was such a chashuv person that his Avodas Hashem was so shalem that they called him Zechariah, the one who is shalem. So Lamaisa, we have an explanation for all of the different reasons why we go 3, 4, 5, and 6. Rabbanan Bryce. Oh, Gishmak one. Or not Gishmak, depending upon. Yeah. Hakoil oilu leminyan shiva. Meaning now, remember, we said before, let's talk about Shabbos. He's going to get 7 aliyahs on Shabbos. And it says, and now, I mean, our minig is, you don't call a cutting up, a 10-year-old up to get an aliyah. You certainly don't go into the Azus Nashim and ask a woman to come up and get an aliyah. Yet the Gemara says, Hakoil oilu leminyan shiva ve'afilu katan. That everyone can go up to get an aliyah. And not only that, it counts towards the 7. Ve'afilu katan, and the pashtus here, it's referring to even an 8-year-old. Meaning we're talking about a person who's not chayiv in mitzvahs. Ve'afilu isha. Just throw away 2 line in the Gemara that is the beginning of a massive discussion when it comes to the halachas. And
listen to that woman down family.
I check it out every once in a while. We come across something. This is a Gemara they're going to have fun with. This is. I mean, the cover the tzibur part you're bothered by.
Yeah.
I'm talking more of the first half. The first half is pretty much a halachic makor. Now, so the question really is over here. So some place can Magen Avram and others want to bring a raya from this Gemara that if you're telling me that a woman and a child can get up and say an aliyah, they bring a raya from here that they're obviously mitzvah on some level in Kriyas HaTorah, which again, you have to sort of understand what exactly is the mitzvah of Kriyas HaTorah. I mean, what are we doing really? This is a yesodistic question where we really could have addressed it any day before and really for a couple of days after as we discussed. What is the mitzvah? So there are many different understandings. I'm not going to go through, all of them, but on one level, it could be that it's just simply the way you'd think, meaning there's a mitzvah, Moshe Rabbeinu and Ezra together in Metakin that a person has to lane, which is sort of like a public Talmud Torah. That's the pashtus and how
They have no chiyuv in Talmud Torah.
Oh, so that's the first kasha they ask. So obviously, if that's what Kriyas HaTorah is alone, the idea that they're going to go up and have an aliyah, that doesn't make sense. So here you come to a little bit of a definition. So the Magen Avram wants to prove from here that women are mitzvah in Talmud Torah. It doesn't talk about a katan. It's a little bit difficult to say from here that you'd have a raya that they're mitzvah because it includes katan, and there's not a tzad to say that a katan should be chayav. It doesn't say that it's dafka talking about a katan she'higil lechenach. And even if it would be, how could someone who's not mitzvah b'davar be mighty someone who is mitzvah b'davar, which is generally a concern, right? By Megilla, we don't say that a katan she'lo higil lechenach it can be mighty. A shaita can't do it, right? And we say a woman really shouldn't do it. Ideally, if she's not mitzvah in the same level we are.
It's not being motzi in the same way because there are several aliyos. Who says you have to be yotze every aliyah in that way?
Okay, but I'm saying if there is a din that you have to be mighty.
She's reading the Torah.
It didn't say she's reading it.
That's what we.
So the pashtus is if they're getting up there, if they're getting up to make the bracha, they're getting up to. I mean, that's one way around it. Another shiloh they ask over here is about kol isha. If she's reading, she's laning it with the trup that she's singing. We're talking about kol isha, so the post can go to town over here also.
Yeah.
Is this called kol isha? It's not called kol isha. Maybe if this is called kriya, zmira, it really becomes a little bit of a jumping off board. This becomes a springboard for a lot of very fun conversations at a Shabbos meal.
Did we discuss a woman reading the Megillah?
So we discussed the women reading Megillah, but it's not so much that a woman could read the Megillah for men, right?
I think it's very unlikely that any woman in the time of the Gemara, except maybe Brewer, would have known how to read it with the truck.
With the truck,
So
yeah.
probably,
Or could even be reading it in
At all.
Ksav Ashuris,
Yeah,
meaning
right,
who
right.
says that.
So when the Gemara said it, they have to have meant something. They may have meant a man reading it, and she's saying the bracha.
Yeah, but the pashas in the Gemara, the simple reading. I mean, I hear it. You're going to get kicked out of every woman's yeshiva that has ever existed. But yeah, 100%. The pashas in the Gemara is that a woman can read. Right. So the shaila is like this. I think it could be there's an explanation for it. Right. I mean, we're not saying that she'll be mighty a man, because the question, like I said, what is the mitzvah of Kriyas HaTorah? So if we understand that the mitzvah of Kriyas HaTorah is that we all have as a tzibor a chiyuv to read the Torah, and those are the 7 people we're sending up to take care of it for us, then we have major issues. You're right. You can't have a woman, you can't have a kid. It's like a shlichus baby, maybe, so it would be a problem. But if the understanding is that Moshe Rabbeinu and Ezra together are mitaken that we have to have a public learning of Torah. So is there a halacha that says about a mitzvah boy who's 11 years old, 12 years old, a young boy can't get up and say Dvar Torah? Is that not Torah when he says it? Rather it is.
Right.
And if you don't call it, let's leave the kolisha thing on the side for a second. If a woman gets up and lanes the sedra, so I mean it's not kavod hatzibur as the Gemara says, and we'll see in a second why not. But it could be if all she's doing is just telling us, she's just telling us over what it says in the parsha.
No trip or anything, right? Just reading it.
Even if she, let's take the kolisha issue out for a second.
Right.
Let's pretend for a moment. Let's say either you say that the reading it like that's not called kolisha, or when she lanes, she's not doing it with all the asnachtas and the trups and the whatever. So okay, so she's getting up there, she's teaching Torah. A woman can't say Dvar Torah. We do a shiur once a week. Avada, it's Torah, meaning it maybe not so tznius to have men sitting and asking questions and stuff like that. But if you somehow can get around the issue of there being a tznius issue in terms of Kriyas HaTorah, if all it really is just public Torah learning, so it could be maker adin. She's not being motzi us in our mitzvah. Right. We have a mitzvah to hear Torah. Whether it's a person who gets up as a Talmud Chacham, or it's a woman, or it's a child, or a nun, it doesn't make a difference. That's called. So there are Rishon. There's a Rimi Lunil who effectively says that the mitzvah of Kriyas HaTorah is, and I think the Rambam's mashma like this. The mitzvah of Kriyas HaTorah is we have a chiyuv to hear the Torah. And the way we do that is on a regular day, it's 3 people. On Rosh Chodesh, it's 4, 5, 6, and 7. And on Shabbos, it's 7. The Mefarshim all speak out that even if a woman's allowed to do it, she shouldn't be doing the whole thing, but she could be idle a minion. So then the question is, okay, so what's the Gemara saying that it's not kavod hatzibur, meaning nemanushach, meaning either it's mutter, in which case then let her do it, or it's usher, in which case then why are we even? So there they say that if
there's an option to replace the current Torah reading with a Dvar Torah from, let's say, a minor.
So no. So obviously, if Chazal are mitaken that it has to be this way, we have to do it the way they're misaking it. But the question then comes down to, so why is it not a kavod hatzibur for a woman? So here also there's a discussion. But to me, the most obvious reason is if you tell me that the whole reason why she's allowed to go up is in order to just be mashmiya the Torah so that we can hear it and be yotzei our mitzvah of hearing it. So it's a shtickle b'zyonis to a community that you can't find a Talmud Chacham amongst who's sitting there, 7 guys who could sit and learn. You have to find a woman who's not mitzvah and Talmud Torah to be the one teaching. That's a shtickle, not kavod haTorah, not kavod hatzibur. It's not that it's not a kavod because she's a woman and we don't want to have our, we have no problem with, certainly in our community, we have no problem with a woman giving a speech. We go to last night I was at a speech, a woman spoke. It's a normal, very yeshivish place. It happens. It's a normal thing to, I'm not going to say where I was. But either way, for whatever reason. But it's more an issue of
like
schools all the time. Yeah, maybe that's where I was. So it's more an issue of it's not a kavod hatzibur that we can't find 7 people who.
Who's sneeze issue, you're saying?
No, I'm not saying it's a sneeze issue. What I'm saying is she could be covered from the top to the bottom. But it's a little bit bizyonish that you can ask someone, hey, can someone come up here and show me the Gemara? And we can't find 7 guys in the shul who could show up. But the one woman I grabbed, she knows how to do it. It's a little embarrassing.
I think he means sneeze in the sense of kol kavod basmel.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Meaning it's not a covered because of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another thing is, I think the language of the Tosefta a little bit is mashma. They don't say women can be motzi the tzibur with whatever. They just say olin the minyan shiva. So olin the minyan shiva implies that it's about the count, not about the. Why would they use this language?
Right. It's the language that's what we're going to see in a moment is used for haftarah also,
right.
Meaning where there's a laning that's not an ideal type of laning, can it count towards the minyan? So yeah, it could be.
Let's say in COVID, when for whatever reason they didn't want people getting aliyahs, and you had just the Balkori laying the whole thing, so there was only one aliyah. You were Yotzei Kriyas HaTorah. You don't need 7 aliyahs to be Yotzei Kriyas HaTorah. We do 7 aliyahs. But it's not that it's somehow ma'akev Kriyas Torah. You have to separate those two things.
Yeah, I think I think it's either a Prima Gadam or a Magan Avram. I forget what I saw last night, but who say that when it says here in the Brisa that an Isha and a Katan can do it, he says nowadays we don't allow a Katan to do it, and he said, but we can let them do, we let them do maftir maybe.
Yeah.
So there's a Ramosha, there's a long tshuva from Ramosha. I didn't go through it. I just saw it quoted.
Let's say you have no Kohen, only Kohen.
So if the only kohen is a katan, also not supposed to do it ideally, that there's no din of bekidashtim by a katan. But I think Ramosha has a discussion where he's trying to understand how is it possible. So he says nowadays, even though you could use a katan for maftir, he says you shouldn't let a katan do the actual kriya. I mean, nowadays we have someone who's a balkriya or balkaire. He gets up and lanes, and we send 7 other gedolim. Can we have a katan who just happens to be really good at laning? He's 11 years old and he wants to lane. Can we use him? I mean, if what I'm saying, right? Why not? Meaning it's very clear that you can. Nowadays we don't do that. Ramosha's bothered. Why not? So Ramosha has a beautiful teretz. He says, in the times of the Gemara, when a katan was getting up, what was he doing? He was the one who was saying the bracha, or at least laning. And when he was laning it, he was the one getting the aliyah, and he was the one who was laning it. So there you could say, like we said, that his job is to effectively just say over the Torah, and it's our job to hear it and be yotzei our mitzvah of Kriyas Torah. But nowadays that we don't do that, and really we have one Bal Kairei. So that Bal Kairei is no longer just being mashmiya to the rabbin. He is a shliach of each one of the aliyahs. Each one who's oila, each one of those 7 people are like making the Bal Kairei a shliach for his aliyah. Mm-hmm. That's a problem. He's a katan. You can't make a katan a shliach. Meaning that's how Ramosha gets around it. He says in the times of the Gemara, he wasn't a shliach. He was just a speaker. He was like we turn the speaker on, say the Torah. I could be yotze by hearing him. But now it's more than that. The Balkari is acting on behalf of the Ola. If he's acting on behalf of the Ola as a shliach, so that person has to be a gadol, because otherwise you can't have a din shliach. A little bit of yeshiva.
Why shouldn't the katan get the aliyah and lay the maftir? Then he's not becoming a shliach.
Yeah, so theoretically speaking, would work both ways.
So Moshe wasn't talking about that?
No.
What was he talking about?
He was talking about if you're sending 7 adults up, and you have the Balkairi himself is a katan.
Oh, the Balkairi is a katan.
Right. If the Balkairi is a katan, you can't make the Balkairi a shliach for each one of the olas because they're all gedolim. You're bringing up if let's say the ola is also a katan, right? Mm-hmm. Then in a chanami, you probably would. I don't know if he says.
What was Rav Moshe saying? You have a Balkairi for the 7 aliyahs. You shouldn't allow a katan.
No. He's saying you shouldn't allow a katan to be the Balkairi.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Now, why not? Meaning, if what we're saying, it's clear in the Gemara that.
Oh, he's asking on the Gemara.
Right. Yeah.
Because our practice was only to give a kohen maftir, not the other aliyahs.
What do you mean kohen maftir? What do you mean?
A katan.
Yeah, that's our current minhag. Yeah. He's trying to explain why. He's trying to explain why don't we allow a Balkairi to go ahead and just be a katan?
So why can't you do a katan as bracha instead of the aliyah?
Say it again.
Why can't you have a katan do the bracha, not the aliyah itself, not read Torah itself? The opposite. So you're saying read Torah, but you can, because you can't have him as a shaliach. Why can't you do a bracha?
So the pashtus is that the only heter to use to do the kriya with a katan is the fact that he's the kairei, right? But if a katan, no, it works both ways. Rav Moshe is saying that if you're talking about shlichus, then the ola who's going up is also a katan. Also, he can't be a mamana to someone else's shliach.
Okay, it's not a katan. So a guy who's reading the Torah is not the katan. The guy who's doing the bracha is the katan.
Shlichus is I need to have 2 people. I need to the person who's
hire someone else.
No, shlichus requires das, and the assumption, meaning if I want to make you a shliach, I have to have das, and you have to have das.
And if there's not das.
Yeah, when we call halachic das less than 13 for a boy, all right. Either way, I mean it's a very gishmak discussion, but either way, maftir mahu shiyalu leminyan shiva. Can the person who gets called up for maftir? Now we have to understand. We have to use the right terms here. Let's just understand. What do we mean when we say haftarah? So in the times of the Mishnah, times of the Gemara, what was the haftarah? The haftarah was what we'll call shvi'i, right? What we call shvi'i, the 7th laning, right? So the question is, and then that person would go and lane the haftarah. There's 2 different shittas as to what the haftarah was. Why did we even do it? The famous one is the Tosfos Yontif and Mishnayos quotes from Sefer Tishbi, I think it's called, who says that the reason why we lane is because during the times of Antiochus, he made a takana that you couldn't have Kriyas HaTorah, but for some reason he was davka makbid on the tuf of Tanakh, and he had no problem with the nun and the chaf. So he said, what we did was we instituted the haftorah as like a kiyum of Kriyas HaTorah. So since that's what we did, that minhag eventually, the original takana went away. We never wanted to stop doing the haftorah. So it's kilu. The haftorah really is like a kiyum of them. Then there's other shittas who say that the haftorah really was just an institution of public Torah learning. That just like during in the long time ago we used to learn in the afternoons, but then as it became difficult to make parnasa, we stopped doing that. But we at least wanted to be mekayim the din on Shabbos. So therefore on Shabbos, at the end of davening, they added a little extra Torah learning. Whatever the makor is, this idea of a haftarah, you first have to have a maftir. Meaning what? We don't just call the Baal HaMaftir, the Baal Haftarah up, and he makes a bracha on the Haftarah. You first make a little bit of a laning. Now, why do we do that? We'll see in the Gemara. It's because it's a kavod HaTorah. It would be a bizayon to the Torah to call someone up to only lane from Nach and not to also lane from the Torah. Right. So therefore, that's where that minhag comes from. Now, the question is, nowadays, what do? We do maftir. Really, it doesn't add anything. All he's doing is just rereading the last 3 or 4 psukim, and then he says the haftarah. But in the times of the Gemara, that person who would do the haftarah would also be a part of the laning, right?
Or shvi.
What we would call shvi. So the question is that guy who's doing the haftarah, is the fact that he's reading from the Torah considered chashuv enough that he is ola leminyan, meaning can he count for the 7, or no? Do we need to have 7 separate people, and then he can lane something new, and then lane the haftarah? So meaning really, were there 8 olim on Shabbos, or were there only 7? That's the question of the Gemara.
They would stop, the shvi would stop and reserve a few psukim.
Reserve a few psukim for the end.
Okay.
Or
Do we know that?
So I'm answering yes on that, but that's not so clear because we're so melumed in the breaking up of the parshas, and I'm using the word parsha here incorrectly. We're so used to the breaking up of the sedras the way they're broken up. But the truth is that there really isn't much of a Masorah on that. That was very much a byproduct of convention. In fact, in Eretz Yisrael, for many, many, many years, they laned on a cycle that went for 3 or 3.5 years, whereas we in the Chutz La'aretz were always doing a year. And even that, how you double up the parshas, and why those parshas were chosen, none of that is like halach l'mosh misina. That's really more communal convention that has adjusted over time. So the idea that Shvi'i stopped at that, exactly at this pasuk, who says that that's the end of Shvi? They could, which is, by the way, you clearly see from the fact that there's so many different minhagim in the Haftarah. We discussed it the other day. Obviously, the same way you find by the Haftarah, minhag Sfarad, minhag Teiman, minhag Ashkenaz, and Sfarad, they have 100 different ways to read a different. Some of them lane a completely different sefer for certain Haftarahs. So obviously, you have the idea that it wasn't always locked in it there. But in the times of the Gemara, the maftir would actually lane additional psukim. Okay, so let's see inside. Ibaylahu, Ibaylahu. Maftir mahu shiyal leminyan shiva. Rav Huna v'Reb Yirmiyah bar Ava. It's machlekes, and I guess Rav Reuven Margolis would tell us which one is which. Yeah. Chadamar oila v'chadamar ein oila. So one says there were 7, and the 7th one was the guy who also got maftir, right? He got maftir and then said lein the haftarah. And the one who holds that it's not oila holds that no, he's not oila. Therefore, there was 7 besides him, and then he laned additional. And obviously, if he laned additional, that means he laned at least an additional 3 psukim, because right, we said every aliyah has to have 3. Gemara says, "Manda Omer Oila Dahakari." Why is he Oila? Because Lamaisa he's reading from the Torah, meaning he's reading additional new psukim from the Torah. Umanda Omer Ein Oila, he holds like Ula. Look at the Ula. Omer Ula Mipnei Ma Hamaftir Ben Novi Tzarach Sheyikra B'Torah Tchila. Why do we even have him reading to begin with? Is Mipnei Kavod HaTorah? Because it's a bizayon to the Torah that he should just get up and start laning nach and not say something from the Torah. If that's not called being oila leminion. So again, it's a suffix about whether it's considered a real kriyas HaTorah or if it's really just only like a technicality that we have him lane, in which case then it wouldn't count to the minions. The Gemara wants to ask a kasha, but really you can bring a raya. Meisvei hamaftir ben navi lo yifchos mi esrim ve'echad psukim. The person who does maftir, when he does the haftarah, he should not lane something less than 21 psukim. Why? Keneged shiva shekara b'Torah. Keneged the 7 that lane. Now, which one is it? If there was only 7 laning, meaning it's not, he's oila min aminyan. Why would that be 7? Because then he's the 7th. Then it's very good. However, if you're going to tell me that he's not oila min aminyan, so that means you really have 8 laners, right? 8 balei kriya. In which case, then you have a minimum of 24 psukim. V'imisa esrim v'arba avin. So Gemara says no, not a raya. Meaning lo'ilam it could.
Each one needs to be 3 pasukim.
Yeah, because meaning don't have a haftarah less than 21, because if there are 7 people laning, you'll never have a parsha less than 21. And if you'll never have and again, here's another raya. You see clearly that the parsha, like I don't think you could find a single parsha in the Torah that is 21 psukim that we have. We don't break it up that way. But if you're breaking it up into 3.5 years, I guarantee you there were some parshas that were 21 psukim.
Torah that be less than 20 pasukim, you know?
So we'll see in a moment. Halacha l'maisa, what we're saying right here is no. It has to be a minimum of 21 because you'll never have kriyas haTorah less than 21. But the Gemara is bothered if it's eina olam in a minyan, then that means really he doesn't count. I need another person, which really means I have like 7 real korim and then him, who's just like sort of a technical koreh. But l'maisa, I have 24 psukim of Torah. So if that's the case, we should be reading 24 psukim in haftarah. So Gemara says not a right. Maybe lo'ilim we only read. Maybe he is olam in a minyan. Maybe he's not Olam in Aminyan. And the fact that you have him reading, that's not it's the same argument that we said before, that it's a technicality, and therefore he's not Olam in Aminyan, is the same argument that says we don't have to go ahead and read Psukim Kenegdai. Kivan de Mishum Kavod HaTorah Kenegdai Nami Leibai. So fine.
It sounds like the original Takana of Kriyas Torah is to have Olam go up and read the Torah, and then as a convenience, we made a cycle. Eretz Yisrael made one cycle, Bavel made another cycle, but that's not the definition. So the definition is only really 21 psukim.
Right.
That's what you need.
And again, if you think about it from the perspective of what Kriyas HaTorah to begin with was, that all it really is we didn't want to go 3 days without some form of Liman HaTorah. I don't think, Ein Adam Loimed Ela Mashal Libay Chafetz, meaning every community almost can, if they want to, we wanted to like let's say we like Bracious and Shmos a lot more. We feel like a little bit more of a connection to it. So maybe we can schlepp through those two of the 5 books. Then we get to Vayikra. You can make 3 weeks. We knock out the entire Sefer Vayikra because maybe the rabbi, not our rabbi, of course, but maybe the other rabbis maybe don't have a lot of Torah to say because they don't know Kachim. Then we'll get to Bamidbar. We go back to the stories again.
You're saying that, so we think the number of pasukim in HaTorah should correspond to the number of at least a minimum.
Yeah, as a Kavod HaTorah.
Therefore, we can say that the HaTorah is sort of like the people who access who are using the HaTorah is sort of like Shaliach reading Torah reading. Therefore, the person reading HaTorah should be a Katanai to them.
So the truth is really even though we will give maftir to a cotton. Yeah, no. But generally speaking, the person you give maftir to is the person who lanes. So even though we will give maftir to a cotton, there are minhagim. Now the reading of the Haftorah, that pashtus really is not a problem. That's really just a kari b'tayra. That's not a big deal. But I don't think there's anyone who has the minhag to let them do maftir, but then stop them from doing the Haftorah. But
there are also practical reasons which are mixed in, which is that most katanim can't do it accurately, and then you don't want to embarrass the other ones by giving
that's a good point.
Smart ones.
And it could be right. Meaning it's a little bit harder to lane the and it's just less frequent. It's not a skill that most people have. Okay, so we have an opinion that's basically saying over here that you can't have the Haftorah fewer than 21 psukim, and even though it's not Olam in Aminyan, that's not a raya. This is just a general question on this concept. You're telling me over here that the Haftorah can't be less than 21 psukim, but the Haftorah for Parshas Tzav, which starts with Olei Seichem Sefu, is only, I think, 17 psukim. I think we add 2 psukim from a different area because it's a very somber ending, so we add on a couple of psukim.
That's what Roni Akora was the shortest, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, you'd know better than me.
Okay.
The Lehavyan, I check out during that time of davening. Unfortunately, I'm that guy. Yeah, the Lehavyan has Esser and Bechad, right? That it's not 21. The Karina. So he says Shani Hasm B'Solik Inyana, which is an answer that really is used to explain even Kriyas HaTorah itself. Kriyas HaTorah itself, we said earlier that really you shouldn't have it be less than 10 psukim. It's only it shouldn't be less than 10 psukim when the parsha you're reading from is longer than 10 psukim. You shouldn't read less than 10 of it. But if the inyan itself is finished after 9, like for instance on the morning of Purim, where we only lay 9 psukim and we don't do a dialog like Rav said earlier, there it wouldn't be a problem. So certainly over here by the Haftorah you can read 10 and it wouldn't be a big deal. You're telling me that if it's doesn't end in the middle, then you have to go at least until 21. Oftentimes I was by Rabbi Yochanan, and I would read 10 psukim in the Haftorah, and Amrlan Afsiku, and then he would stop me and say, "You're good, you finished, we're yaitse." So what's the kasha? The kasha is he says not 21, and over there it was in the middle of the topic. It didn't end. So how does that work? So he says Mokum sheyesh turgum and shani. When you have someone explaining it, it's different. Now, there's two different shittas in the Rishonim here. Rashi says because of tircha de tzibura, meaning, rather we want to have the mechaber the Torah and not have the haftorah go less than 21 psukim. But okay, if you're going to have a meturgamon, so then you're doubling that. That's 42 psukim. So that's already a tircha de tzibura to make people sit and listen to that. As I'm sure everyone sits sometimes through a very long haftarah. At a certain point, you're just like, all right, enough already, right? So over here too, it's a tircha de tzibura. Other Rishonim learned that no, what it means here is that if you have a meturgamon, you read 10 psukim, you're at 20. So all you need is one more pasuk and you're good to go. So that's what it means. He stopped him after 10 because it's not beduyik really. He should have stopped him after 11 because 10 would only mean you have 20 psukim, not 21. But either way.
You could also explain it's about the kavod of the inyan. If you do a really quick thing, it's like a short sermon that the rabbi gives. No one takes it seriously. But if the Mitzurgaman is translating, it adds to the depth and adds to the kavod. I mean,
again, if he's saying a tircha de tzibur of art, then I would say the opposite. I would say, and I'll say this the same. Last night, someone spoke way too long. Meaning, at a certain point, you have to really be careful. Meaning, everyone wants to hear what's going on in the Torah, but you have to be a little bit.
Right. I'm saying not the Tzibur. I'm saying, let's say you come from it from the other end.
Yeah.
It's about the kavod of the inyan. So it makes sense that having a Mitzurgaman would require you to say less because the Mitzurgaman's adding ideas and explanations.
It sounds like what there was a custom where somebody learned and somebody was translating at the same time.
Oh, that's exactly what it was. I'm sorry, I didn't explain that. Yeah, at the times of the Gemara, times of the Mishnayos for sure, they would lane from the Torah, one pasuk, and then someone would be standing there and explaining what's going on. Which, by the way, could cut down on schmoozing in davening, or I don't know. Would that make talking less? Would that make talking more, I think, right? More.
Well, he said the Targum, basically, but they understood Aramaic, and, for them, that was helpful.
And the pastors today, if we were to have such a minhag, we would be getting up in English. Yeah, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, now what's the raya? The Tani Rav Tachlifa Bar Shmuel Lo Yishanu Ela B'Makom She'ein Turgaman Aval Makom She'ein Turgaman Places. So you see that's the halacha. Okay, right. Mishnah says Ein person al Shema person here is a little bit. It's a funny lashon, but it basically is referring to a case where let's say people came late to minyan. It's a hechidusha, maybe it's a makor for that, although it's not so pashut that the post can go nuts on that. But yeah, in yeshivas, I think it's from the Alta from Slobodka, pretty much. Anyone who came out of Slobodka, he saw that what was happening in minyan was that guys were anyways learning throughout all the Chazar Sashatz. It was becoming a shtuk of bizayin to davening. So what he did was he says, what do I need to make the mincha so long that they're anyways not paying attention? They're not. No one here needs it. The shliach tziburs, the shots, they're all Talmidei Chacham. All right, we need kedusha. And then I heard another pshat that they said that I think I heard this in Eretz Yisrael. Rav Ruderman was a Talmud, and then somehow trickled down into my rebbeim, and they said that really it's because by kedusha it's more the whole reason you have chazar sashatz is in order to be mitzvah the tzibur. The tzibur is
not pekim,
but if you have a tzibur that's pekim, he says not only that. He says the reason why we will do a kedusha is because when you have a tzibur made up of people who are big like Hashem, the shemesra goes a little long, and when you have a person going long shemesra, he can go his whole life never hear a kedusha, because by the time they get to kedusha, he's still holding by face Mashiv Baruch Amir Geshem or whatever, and then so by the time he's finished with his davening, they're already holding 20 minutes of the second seder. It's a big problem.
I can't believe 19th or 20th century yeshivas instituted something new. They must have found a minhag.
Could be.
Safer,
I don't know, but it seems like it's only the Alter from Slobodka's progeny, Talmidim, who do it. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky said the same thing. I mean, he was also a cousin of Rav Ruderman.
Well, it's a question for research.
Yeah.
Someone who has access to manuscripts and Google.
Not me. I'm cheap. I don't pay for the access. Okay. Ein person al shema. So what was this? This is person al shema's technically talking about where, let's say people come late to a minyan and they're trying to figure out how do we get how do we yotze with the minyan. So what they would do is they would only say a part of shema. That's where it comes from. Person like prusas lechem, a piece of bread. But either way, these are where all this mission is going to be discussing the halacha of dvarim that need a minyan.
Part of the brachos of shema.
Part of the brachas of Shema, they wouldn't say Birchas Shema. They would say the brachas, but they would say only, I think, the first parasha or second parasha of Kriya Shema. Either way, ve'ein oyivrin lifnei hateva, chazar sashatz, ve'ein noisin es kapeim Birchas Kohanim, ve'ein kairin b'Torah, ve'ein maftirin b'Navi, ve'ein oisin ma'amad Moshe, which is talking about by an ovel, when you would do certain things you would stand, certain things you would sit. Ve'ein oimer Birchas Avelim, you don't say the bracha in the street when the Avelim are passing by. B'tanchumi avelim, same thing. Ubirchas chasanim, you don't say sheva brachas. Ve'ein mezamnin b'shem pachas mesar. All of these things require a minyan. The karkos tisha the kohen. Karkos, when you're talking about being poda karka from hegdish, it has to be done with a minyan. We'll get to that in a minute. And the minyan has to actually have a kohen, so it's 9 regulars and then 1 kohen. The adam, and if you're being poda an adam, which we'll have to also discuss, how can a person be a part of hegdish? Kiyotim, you also need 9 in a kohen. The kasha they all ask over here, we're holding a Masechta Megillah, and it doesn't say anything about Megillah.
You need 10 from Megillah.
What about 10 for Megillah? Meaning, certainly, B'tzibur, you need, meaning certainly for Pesumei Nisi, you need it. Now, Avada, you have a chiyuv on your own to read Megillah. That's not what we mean. What we mean is the mitzvah of Megillah is done B'tzibur. So why isn't it mentioned over here? So the poskim all speak out a very interesting idea, which is that, and it's
all of these things are things you couldn't do without.
So you're touching right. So you're touching on a little bit of a different thing.
Yeah.
So what we mean over here in these inyanim here, and it comes out a big chiddush la'alacha like this, is what this Mishnah is telling us is that if you don't have a personal chiyuv, right? If there's no personal chiyuv, this Mishnah is only listing those things that the tzibur, the existence of a tzibur, is mechayev you in the mitzvah, and until it exists, you don't have a mitzvah. Meaning, there's a famous story of Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. They were in a hotel in Europe somewhere with it was his Adim or whoever it was. And one of them was trying to pull, and they had to daven in the room for whatever reason. They couldn't get a minyan where they were. It wasn't a firm community. And Reb Chaim, someone went down to go try to pull together a bunch of Jews so they could do Kriyas HaTorah. Don't ask me where they found the Torah, whatever. Reb Chaim was like, no need. Meaning, there's no halacha that you have to wake up on a Thursday and lane. If you're in a minyan, like let's say you're in a minyan over here and you don't get a minyan, or there's a minyan for Shachris, and then someone walks out, and so now you're holding where there's only 9 people. Do you have a chiyuv to go try to find a 10th? I mean, yeah, you send a text message maybe, but
in the beginning of COVID, when we were davening in our living rooms, my son and I would lane from a tikkun, but we didn't think we were doing anything. We just wanted to hold on to the. Even if we had a Torah, we wouldn't have thought.
So you're not doing anything.
Yeah,
that's sort of the point. You're learning Torah, but I'm saying it's not.
We just wanted to just feel it.
So they bring so that's how they answer. Megillah is not mentioned over here because you're right. Meaning you'd have a chiyuv to lane Megillah no matter what. Either way, Gemara says, "Minani mili." Where do we learn that you need a minyan, and that and not only that a minyan works, and how many? So Gemara says like this: Amr Rabbi Chia bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan Damakrov Niskadash B'Seich Bnei Yisrael Kol Davar Shebekdusha Lo Yehei Pachas Me'asara. Anything that is a Davar Shebekdusha, which is the term we'll use, like I just described, where the minyan is mechayev, that needs 10 people. My mashma, where do you see in the pasuk that it needs 10? The Tanu Rabbi Chia Asya Teich Teich. It's Gzeir Shav Ksiv Hach Niskadash B'Seich Bnei Yisrael Uksiv Hasamai Kairach Yibadlu Misoicha Eda. So that just tells me that it's Seich Seich. Okay, what does that help? The Asya Eda Eda. It's a double Gzeir Shav. I have Seich to connect this pasuk to Kairach, and then from Kairach I go to Meraglim. The Asya Eda Eda the Chsiv Hasam Ad Mosei LaEda Aro Azois Umala Holan Asara Afkan Asara. A pelagic thing. So it comes out that where do we know that I need a minyan is 10? Not only from the Meraglim, but from Kairach. Like you couldn't find. Maybe 2 negatives make a positive. I don't know what the pshat is, but l'chura, what they say over here, the Chassidish Rebbes, they all say, I believe they say it in the name of the Eish Kodesh. I think they say it in the name of the Eish Kodesh. It says, from here, what do you see? Specifically coming from these drushes to show you a yid is a yid is a yid is a yid. At the end of the day, everyone's mitzvah to a minyan. I don't care what he thinks in his head, what he thinks in his heart. If he's standing there and he came from a Jewish mother, he's just as much a right to be there as the Gadol Adar. And he was obviously saying this with his experience of having gone through what he went through about a yid is a yid is a yid. And he says, not only that, it means even a Pashti yid, what he was capable, he was talking about in the camps, obviously, what a yid was capable of doing, the Kiddush Hashem, to die al Kiddush Hashem, was something that you can't imagine, but even Pashti yidin were shaykh to. It's the same idea by a minyan. A minyan is made up of yidin, the simplest yidin in the world. That makes a minyan. 10. You take the most chashuv guy in the world, you shove him in the room, doesn't help. Either way, Kivin the boiler meber imdu yikarim amoidu shavu yikarim shavu. So you're talking about yikarim here, chashuv people. Therefore, batzir ma'asara lav oirech ara. It's a svara. That's a very interesting thing. We didn't want to say that for davar shebekdusha. You can rely on a svara. So it must mean that since davar shebekdusha we learn is 10. Once you learn that, so then any davar shebekdusha, any davar chashuv needs 10. What is the bracha birchas avelim? Birchas rechova. It's referring to the bracha that's given when they're standing in the street. Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Yochanan, birchas avelim v'asara has to be 10. Ve'ein avelim in a minyan, but the avel isn't part of the minyan. Meaning you need 10 people besides him. But Chasanim Ba'asara, and there we say the Chasanim in a minyan. It's a discussion in Ksubas Nefches.
Is that because he's an onain and he's not five mitzvahs?
No, because
Or
I think Avel, yeah, right. Meaning the
already-
Avel that you're talking about over here is the Avel of an Oinen,
Yeah.
because you're talking about on the day. So that could be. It could be that he's not Olam in a minyan because he's Pater for mitzvahs.
Or maybe he's just so.
But a
drunk.
chassan is also patur for
Right.
mitzvahs. So, but that argument, I mean, that's the juxtaposition that we're putting the two together. The Gemara over there in Ksubas brings two psukim as to why a chassan needs to have sheva brachas b'minyan. One pasuk is from uses the lashon of kahal, and one pasuk is the pasuk by Boaz that he grabbed 10 people. So they want to bring a raya that depending upon which pasuk you're going with, if you're bringing from the pasuk that has 10 people and he grabbed them, that would be a raya that the chassan isn't oilul leminyan. But if you go from the other pasuk that just says hikalu, and you just you brought together 10 people, the chassan would be part of the minyan. But either way, let's go back to a little bit. Vein mezamnin almozin b'shem pachs me'asara kivin the boiler meimer nevarach lelokeinu batzim me'asara la'vayirachara. Also, it's not considered. Meaning, it's a very interesting thing. Since you're going to, it's a little bit backwards. Meaning, normally the way we think of it is you don't say lelokeinu unless you have 10. Then you have to say lelokeinu. What the Gemara is saying is, since you're supposed to say lelokeinu, it would be inappropriate to do it with less than 10 people. So if you have 9, nebuch, we can't say lelokeinu. Right in the Gemara, v'hakakos tisha v'kayin v'adam kiyotze behen minani mili. Where do we learn this from? Mashmol asara kayhanim ksuvim beparsha and chad legufei ve'idach miyat achar miyat. Meaning it mentions kayin 10 times in that parsha of Hegdish and by Pidyon Hegdish. So the first one is to teach me that you need a kayin, and the other 9 are telling me you don't need a kayin. Meaning it's miyat achar miyat to tell me that the other 9 don't need to be kayhanim. The Gemara of ein miyat achar miyat el rabbis tishi Yisrael mchad kayin. Ask the Gemara Bam Kasha.
I think it adds up to 8, even at this stage, because you only get the miyut achar miyut
With the third one.
The third one.
The
So
second one isn't a miyat. First one's not a miyat either.
Right. I
Right.
have a problem already,
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah,
but I
right.
didn't see that.
But let's just say it.
Okay.
Let's just say it simple, and then we can talk about it. Ve'ema chamisha kayhanim, v'chamishi Yisraelim. Why? Because again, ein miyat achar miyat means I have a riboy. I'm including something. The following thing after it's a miyat. But okay, that first miyat is only telling you that guy should not be. You should not need that person. So the second guy after the second time it says kayin miyat achar miyat, now I assume it's lerabos. That's included. Meaning, why are you keeping excluding? It must be the exclusions aren't really exclusions. You're saying it's almost like here it really is like a double negative. It's like a miyat with another miyat. It's almost like you're coming to tell me something over here. Include. So the Gemara is asking if that's the case, and it says 10 times. Then if you do the math on it, it's really only 5 times. Which is really your question on the first step. So Gemara says kasha ein chanami, but not to you. This is not such a bomb kasha. We're anyways being soymich on this halacha, and therefore we'll just last a little bit in the Gemara. Go to the Mishnah. The adam kiyotze behen adam mikadosh that you're talking about being poda and adam. Amrabavohu be'omer demei olai. It's talking about where a person consecrates money to the Beis Hamikdash, but the way he says it is that it should be the value of who I am. Which means the following: the Tanya Ha'omer Demei Alai. How do we establish or evaluate his value? Shomin Oisoi Ke'eved. We treat him like an eved, and since we're treating him like an eved, what we say over here is that just like if he now wants to somehow be paid to himself, he's going to have the same din of an eved. The eved is kish lekarka. We know that eved is there's a hekesh between eved and karka. The pasuk says v'hisnachaltem oisam lebneichem achreichem lereshes achuza. We were referring to an avodim. It says that they pass on from one generation to the next like property. So since it passes like property, we treat it like karka. So too, just like karka requires kayhanim, which we learned above, so too an eved is going to require 10, and therefore that's going to be why you need 10. Shkoyach, Mishnah.
What kind of pidyon are we?
1 second. Today's learning should be for an aliyah, for the neshama of Rabbi Kaufman's mother. Help me out.
Sila.
Basi Chil Tzvi. Her neshama should have an aliyah.
Thank you for honoring.
Okay.